The year was 1871. Ireland lay shrouded in mist, its villages still scarred by famine and silence. In the damp stone cottages and candlelit chapels, people clung to faith as tightly as they clung to survival. But in one forgotten village, a single child began to speak words no one dared to hear. Her name was Catherine Doyle. She was only 7 years old, and yet her lips carried the weight of the grave. Look closely at the old photographs from this era. Children stiffly posed, their faces pale, their eyes haunting. Some of them were not alive when the shutter clicked. Post-mortem photography was common then, capturing the stillness of the dead as though they had never left. And when villagers later spoke of Catherine, they often described her the same way. Pale as marble, eyes far too knowing, a child who looked less like the living and more like one of those disturbing images, frozen in time. At first glance, Catherine seemed ordinary. The youngest daughter of poor farmers, she wore tattered wool, played in the fields, and clutched a rag doll sewn from scraps. But hidden beneath her fragile frame was a voice that carried chilling secrets, secrets no living soul should have known. It began one winter night. The Doyle family sat by the fire, their cottage dark except for the orange glow of burning peat. Catherine's mother was mending clothes. Her father carved a piece of wood. Then, suddenly, Catherine spoke. Her words were not childish. They were sharp, deliberate. She whispered the name of a villager's dead sister, gone for years, buried beneath a moss-covered stone. She described the shawl the woman wore on the day she died, the way her hands trembled before the fever took her. Her parents froze. There had been no photograph of this woman, no story told in Catherine's presence. Yet the details were perfect, precise, impossible. The next day, the story spread through the village. Whispers followed Catherine wherever she went. Some said she was touched by God. Others claimed she was cursed, a vessel for something darker. But as more secrets poured from her lips, hidden sins, forbidden loves, and tragedies buried in silence, the village grew uneasy. Imagine standing in that chapel, damp stone walls pressing in, as Catherine's small voice echoed through the air. She spoke of sins whispered in confession. She revealed the hidden crimes of families who had thought their secrets were safe. She spoke in fragments of a language no one could recognize, a forbidden tongue that made even the priest recoil. The villagers began to see her not as a child, but as a mirror reflecting their own darkest truths. They feared her gaze, those wide eyes that seemed to pierce straight into the soul. Some claimed they saw shadows move around her when she spoke, shapes lingering in the corners of candlelight. Others swore they heard voices joining hers, faint but undeniable, as though the dead themselves leaned close to whisper through her mouth. Dark history remembers moments like these not as myths, but as wounds, haunting reminders of how fragile the line between faith and fear truly was. And Catherine Doyle became one of those wounds. She was the child who spoke the unspeakable, who revealed a hidden truth each time her lips parted. Catherine's words began to spread beyond her home. Families traveled miles to hear her whispers, bringing tokens of the dead, rings, lockets, faded photographs, asking her to speak their secrets. Each time she touched an object, her eyes grew distant, her voice hollow, as though she was pulled somewhere far away. The answers she gave were never comforting. They were precise, cold, filled with eerie details no child should ever know. And yet, the more she spoke, the weaker she became. Her body grew thin, her skin pale. It was as if every secret she carried drained her life away. Still, she could not stop. The words poured from her like a curse. Look again at those old photographs of children from the 19th century. The blurred edges, the hollow stares. Some of them look almost alive, others disturbingly still. Catherine's face, though no photo of her survives, was said to resemble those same disturbing images, caught between life and death, between innocence and something far more sinister. As the year moved forward, the villagers would learn that Catherine Doyle was not simply a child with strange words. She was a storm gathering in silence. A storm of chilling secrets, forgotten tragedies, and forbidden knowledge. And once it began, there would be no way to silence her. What Catherine spoke next would divide her village, draw the attention of the church, and leave behind one of the most unsettling mysteries in Ireland's shadowed past. The village where Catherine Doyle was born seemed ordinary at first glance. Narrow lanes of dirt cut through clusters of stone cottages. Smoke drifted from peat fires, carrying the smell of damp earth and burning wood. Chickens scratched the soil. Children played barefoot in the mud. But when the sun set, the village changed. It became a place of silence, a place where shadows moved longer than they should, and where whispers of unsettling history clung to every doorway. Ireland in 1871 was a country marked by scars. The famine of decades before still haunted its people. Families who had buried their children in unmarked graves spoke little of the past, yet the grief lingered. Old women carried rosaries. Men muttered prayers in half-forgotten dialects. In the candlelit corners of their cottages, people told stories of banshees, restless spirits, and the vanished children who wandered the fields at night. Superstition was not entertainment. It was survival. Look closely at the forgotten photographs from this era. They show families gathered stiffly together, their faces drawn with hunger, their eyes filled with suspicion. In one faded image, a child stands at the front of a cottage, her features blurred, her posture too rigid. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. But stare long enough and the photograph feels wrong, as though the figure is not alive but preserved. Another moment of post-mortem photography, the family pretending death had not yet touched them. These disturbing images were not art. They were memory captured in its most fragile, eerie form. This was the world Catherine Doyle inherited. A strange family, bound by poverty but cursed by the child's strange voice. Her parents tried to quiet her whispers, but the village would not ignore them. They gathered outside the Doyle cottage, waiting for Catherine to speak again. Every word she uttered became fuel for gossip, every revelation a wound torn open. Some villagers were drawn to her. They believed Catherine was chosen, a vessel of divine warning, a child carrying messages from the dead. Others recoiled in fear. They whispered of witchcraft, of forbidden language, of demons speaking through a little girl's lips. At night, the pub filled with tense murmurs. Men gripped their mugs tighter. Women made the sign of the cross when Catherine's name was spoken. The Doyle family themselves grew isolated. Once they had been part of the village's small circle of neighbors, but now their cottage became a place avoided after dusk. Children dared each other to run past it, whispering that the windows glowed with unnatural light. And within the family, silence grew heavier. Catherine's mother was said to sit for hours by the hearth, staring into the flames as though seeing something she could never speak aloud. It was not only Catherine's words that unsettled people. It was the way she looked when she spoke them. Her gaze never wavered. Her small body seemed distant, removed, as though she were not truly present. And sometimes, her words were not in English at all. Witnesses claimed she spoke in broken fragments of ancient Irish, mixed with something far stranger, a language no one could place, as if it had been buried for centuries. A forbidden tongue, creeping back into the world through the mouth of a child. This was a village already haunted by its past. Families still carried guilt from famine days, guilt of food hoarded, neighbors abandoned, children lost. Catherine's whispers tore open these wounds. In the stillness of the chapel, she revealed names tied to betrayal. In the market square, she spoke of graves hidden beneath the hills. Secrets that were meant to remain buried were laid bare. The villagers began to fear their own shadows. At night, shutters were bolted tight. Lanterns burned low. And in hushed tones, some began to wonder aloud. What happens when a child knows too much? There is a photograph, rarely shown, of a group of villagers from that same year. They stand together, stiff and unsmiling. At first, it looks like a simple family portrait. But look closely. One child in the front row has eyes far too sharp, far too knowing. Some say this was Catherine herself, captured on glass. Others deny it, claiming no true image of her survives. Yet the photograph lingers, another artifact of dark history, another piece of evidence lost in time. By the summer of 1871, Catherine Doyle was no longer a curiosity. She was a threat. A child feared as much as she was sought after. And in that small village, where superstition and survival had always gone hand in hand, her presence was enough to unravel everything. Families divided. Faith wavered. Fear spread. And yet, this was only the beginning. For soon Catherine would begin to speak of the dead not just as memory, but as if they were still present. Watching. Listening. Waiting. It was a bitter evening in the winter of 1871. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of peat smoke and rain. Inside the Doyle cottage, the fire cracked weakly, its glow barely warming the stone walls. Catherine sat silent, her small hands folded over her lap. Her family thought it was another ordinary night. But that was the moment she first gave voice to the dead. Without warning, Catherine whispered a name. It was not a neighbor's name, nor a saint's, but that of a woman long gone, Mary Brennan, who had died of fever years earlier. The room fell still. Her parents turned, frozen in place. Catherine's eyes were fixed on the flames, her expression blank, as if she was listening to someone no one else could hear. Then came the details. She described Mary's death in chilling precision, the color of the shawl she wore, the rasp of her breath, the rosary beads clutched in her hand as she slipped away. No photograph of Mary existed. No story had been told in Catherine's presence, and yet the eerie details were flawless, undeniable. Catherine's father dropped his carving knife. Her mother crossed herself, whispering prayers under her breath. The next morning, whispers spread through the village like fire. Neighbors came, curious and afraid. Could it be a coincidence? Or had the child truly spoken with the dead? In a community where superstition clung to every stone, it did not take long for fear to outweigh reason. Look closely at the old photos from this period. Faded portraits of families, their faces rigid, their eyes hollow. Among them are the unsettling post-mortem photographs, children propped upright, lifeless eyes staring into eternity. To the villagers, Catherine now seemed closer to those disturbing images than to a living child. She looked pale, frail, and her words seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. Soon, she began to whisper other names. A farmer who had stolen from his dying brother, a widow who had hidden a pregnancy, a young boy who had drowned in the bog but was never spoken of again. Each revelation carried a chilling secret, truths that had been buried, sometimes for decades. Families trembled. Husbands accused wives. Neighbors turned on each other. What Catherine said could not be disproven. And in a village where shame was as deadly as hunger, these revelations tore open wounds people had fought to forget. Witnesses described Catherine's voice as strange when she spoke these secrets. At times, her tone shifted, deepened, or took on an accent that was not her own. Some swore she spoke in fragments of a forbidden language, words that carried weight, but no meaning anyone could understand. Others claimed her eyes rolled back, her small body stiffening like the corpses in those disturbing images hidden away in family chests. Dark history has preserved accounts of these nights, written in brittle parish notes and fragmented diaries. They speak of Catherine as both a wonder and a terror, a child who blurred the line between miracle and curse. The mystery of her words was not just in their accuracy, but in the way they infected the village with fear. Imagine standing in that cottage, a candle flickering, shadows crawling up the walls, as Catherine Doyle's small voice breaks the silence with the voice of someone long dead. Imagine her gaze turning toward you, her lips forming words you prayed would never be spoken. Would you believe her? Or would you fear she had dragged something unnatural into your home? The Doyle family, already isolated, became trapped. Crowds gathered outside their door. Some came begging Catherine to speak to their lost loved ones. Others cursed them, claiming they had brought a demon into the village. Each night, the family prayed the whispers would stop. But each night, Catherine seemed drawn deeper into her strange gift or curse. There is one account, written years later, of a particularly disturbing image seen by a villager through the Doyle cottage window. He claimed Catherine sat in her chair, eyes wide, whispering to shadows that lined the walls. He swore he saw small shapes moving, childlike, flickering like smoke, surrounding her as she spoke. He fled into the night, never daring to approach the cottage again. By spring of 1871, there was no denying it. Catherine Doyle was no ordinary child. She was becoming a living archive of hidden truth, a vessel for voices that should have stayed silent. And with each whisper, the village grew colder, darker, more divided. But Catherine's secrets were about to go beyond family sins and private griefs. Her whispers would soon turn to crimes unpunished, graves forgotten, and the sins of the most respected men in the village. And once those words were spoken, there would be no turning back. Catherine Doyle was only 7 years old, yet she carried a weight far too heavy for such fragile shoulders. Each whisper she spoke seemed to drain her, leaving her pale and thin, like a candle burning itself away. Villagers came daily, desperate to hear the voices of their lost. They brought tokens, lockets, rings, faded old photos, even scraps of clothing once worn by the dead. Catherine would take these objects into her small hands, stare into the distance, and begin to speak. At first glance, the scene might have seemed ordinary, a child with a trinket. But what followed was not ordinary at all. Her words revealed chilling secrets, intimate details that only the dead should have known. A farmer's missing cow was not lost, but slaughtered in anger. A wife's hidden affair, denied for years, was laid bare. And worst of all, whispers of crimes buried in silence. An uncle who had struck a child, a neighbor who had stolen bread during the famine. The more Catherine spoke, the more her family watched her with dread. Her father would often leave the room, unable to listen. Her mother wept quietly at night, convinced her child was cursed. Catherine herself seemed detached from it all. After each session, her eyes would glaze, her lips trembling as though she had swallowed the grief of an entire generation. She was no longer playful. She no longer laughed. It was as if every hidden truth she revealed stole another piece of her childhood. The villagers, however, were relentless. They came with offerings, pleading for her to whisper their own buried mysteries. Some came with reverence, treating her like a prophet. Others came with suspicion, waiting for her to slip, to prove she was a fraud. Catherine endured them all, her child's voice carrying the tone of an oracle. But in her stillness, in her silence between words, there was something far more unsettling, a presence that seemed not her own. One man, a visiting priest, described her in his notes. He wrote, "Her eyes are too knowing for a child. Her face carries the weight of sorrow she has not lived. When she speaks, I feel as though she is repeating words taught by shadows." These notes survive today, another fragment of unsettling history, another record of the child who should have been ordinary but became an enigma. Look closely at the forgotten events of rural Ireland during this time. Poverty forced children to grow up too quickly. Many vanished into workhouses, never to be seen again. Some were captured in disturbing images of post-mortem photography, their still faces dressed in lace, their eyes painted open to give the illusion of life. Catherine, though alive, looked much the same, still, pale, her eyes too deep, as if she were already slipping into another world. Her whispers also carried something darker. Villagers swore she sometimes spoke in a forbidden language, a strange tongue that rolled off her lips with eerie fluency. They called it the devil's speech. Others said it was older than the church itself, words belonging to Ireland's ancient past, dragged into the present through a child who should not have known them. Each utterance unsettled even the bravest men. Even the priest who wrote about her admitted he felt sick whenever she spoke in that voice. The Doyle family was crumbling under the strain. Their cottage became both a shrine and a prison. People arrived at all hours, knocking on their door, demanding Catherine's whispers. The family tried to refuse them, but fear and curiosity outweighed decency. Catherine became less a daughter and more a vessel, a mirror in which the village saw its own sins reflected. By summer, Catherine's health began to fail. She no longer ran in the fields. She no longer played with other children. Instead, she sat by the fire, staring into the smoke, her lips moving as if in silent conversation with someone unseen. Some villagers claimed they heard voices answering her, faint and distant, like echoes carried on the wind. Imagine being there, standing in that dim cottage, the air thick with peat smoke, as a pale child whispers truths you have fought to bury. Imagine her gaze turning on you, her voice naming something you thought was lost in time. Would you call her blessed? Or would you fear she had become a doorway for the dead? This was Catherine's burden, a childhood consumed by the grief and guilt of others. She was no longer just a little girl. She was a vessel of sorrow, a voice for the sinister past that villagers had tried to forget. And the more she carried, the closer she seemed to drift toward something beyond the reach of the living. But Catherine's words were about to grow even darker. For soon she would no longer reveal personal secrets. She would uncover something far more dangerous, secrets that the village itself had conspired to bury. By the summer of 1871, Catherine Doyle was no longer a mystery. She was a wound that split her village in two. Half saw her as a vessel of God, chosen to reveal the sins of the people. The other half whispered that she was cursed, a child corrupted by something unholy. The village was no longer united. It was fractured, its quiet lanes echoing with suspicion and fear. Look closely at the old photographs from that year. Families posed stiffly before their cottages, their faces tight, their eyes grim. At first glance, they appear ordinary. But behind their stares lies tension, secrets barely contained. Some of these images, now yellowed and cracked, seem almost alive with dread. And yet others look disturbingly still, like post-mortem photography of a community already spiritually dead. Catherine's whispers had grown darker. She no longer spoke of simple family secrets. Instead, she revealed truths that carry danger. She named men who had stolen land during the famine. She spoke of a vanished child, lost years before, and hinted that the child's grave was closer than anyone wished to believe. Each revelation shook the fragile trust between neighbors. Every word she spoke felt like another knife driven into the heart of the village. The Doyle cottage became the center of conflict. Crowds gathered outside, some kneeling in prayer, others throwing stones at the walls. One night, a group of men shouted curses, demanding Catherine be silenced. Another night, women left candles on the doorstep, treating her as a saint. The family was trapped between reverence and hatred, unable to escape the gaze of a community tearing itself apart. The parish priest tried to intervene. He spoke from the pulpit, warning the people not to give power to a child's words. But even he could not deny what he had witnessed. Catherine's whispers contained eerie details that defied explanation, confessions no one should have known, hidden truths that only the dead themselves could carry. His sermons grew hollow, his voice strained, as if he too feared the child more than he feared blasphemy. And so, the village divided itself. Those who believed Catherine gathered quietly at night, treating her as an oracle, begging her to speak of their dead. Those who hated her sharpened their suspicion, watching the Doyle family like predators circling prey. Fear became a constant presence, hanging in the air like smoke. Look again at the disturbing images from that era. Villages captured in grainy photographs, faces blurred by time. At first, the scenes appear simple. Children standing in fields, mothers cradling infants. But the longer you stare, the more sinister they feel, as if each picture hides a secret no one dared to write down. Catherine's own story was much the same. On the surface, she was just a child. But beneath, she carried an unsettling history, a voice that dragged the dead into the living world. Arguments broke out in the tavern. Men accused one another of sins Catherine had revealed. Families fought in the market square, screaming over whispered accusations. The village, once bound by survival, was now collapsing under the weight of its own guilt. Catherine had become both the mirror and the hammer, reflecting their darkness, then shattering it in public. The Doyle family's isolation deepened. Catherine's father was seen less and less in town, his eyes hollow, his back bent under invisible weight. Her mother appeared in the chapel daily, muttering desperate prayers. And Catherine herself, thin, pale, her gaze distant, was no longer seen as a child. She was seen as an omen, an unsolved mystery wrapped in fragile skin. One villager later claimed that when Catherine passed him on the lane, he felt the air grow cold. Her lips never moved, but he swore he heard her voice inside his head, naming something he had done years before, something he thought no one knew. He left the village soon after, vanishing from records, his fate unknown. Another life lost in time, swallowed by her shadow. The division grew so fierce that even the land felt cursed. The fields yielded little. Storms battered the cottages. Every misfortune was blamed on Catherine. Yet, at the same time, every revelation pulled more people to her, desperate to hear what else she might uncover. The village was now trapped in a dangerous cycle, fear of what Catherine might say, and hunger to hear it all the same. Faith clashed with superstition. Families fractured. Friends became enemies. And at the center of it all sat a pale child with eyes too knowing, carrying the weight of every sin she spoke aloud. But soon, Catherine's whispers would move beyond secrets of land and family. Soon, she would reveal something the village could never forgive, something buried in shadows, something tied to the most powerful man among them. By the autumn of 1871, Catherine Doyle's whispers had grown darker than ever before. No longer confined to family sins or childhood tragedies, her words struck at the very core of the village. What she revealed next was not merely unsettling, it was dangerous. It began with a name. A respected man, known for his generosity in the chapel and his influence in the marketplace. Catherine spoke his name in a voice that did not sound like her own. She then described a night, years earlier, when he buried something beneath the trees by the old stone wall. At first, the villagers dismissed it as a child's rambling, but when they went to the place Catherine described, they found a shallow grave. Inside were the bones of a child, a vanished child, long whispered about, but never spoken of openly. Now exposed, the discovery shattered the village. Fear turned to hysteria. The man denied everything, but his protests carried no weight against Catherine's eerie accuracy. His family was shunned. His name, once respected, became a curse. From that moment on, Catherine's words were no longer seen as coincidence. They were seen as weapons. Look closely at the old photos that survive from this village. The families stand stiff and expressionless, the children silent, their eyes hollow. At first glance, they are ordinary portraits. But if you stare long enough, the images take on a sinister weight. As if each photograph hides a crime, each blurred face conceals a hidden truth. Catherine now spoke of other graves, other crimes. She whispered of a midwife who had hidden the body of an infant to conceal a scandal. She named a man who had beaten his servant to death and buried him beneath the peat bog. She told of a young girl who had been locked away by her family, kept from sight until she died in silence. Each revelation tore open wounds that the village had worked desperately to bury. Each whisper made the air colder, heavier, as though the dead themselves were gathering to listen. Families begged her to stop, but others demanded more. The Doyle cottage became a stage for horror storytelling, neighbors leaning forward, trembling, as Catherine's small voice unraveled their sinister past. There are accounts of Catherine entering a trance, her lips moving in a forbidden language, the words thick and harsh, unlike anything spoken in Ireland at the time. Witnesses swore her voice deepened, shifting into tones that did not belong to a child. Some claimed they heard multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping, carrying the weight of the grave. The most disturbing detail came not from her words, but from her silence. After each revelation, Catherine would sit still, eyes wide, her skin pale as bone. She looked less alive than ever, resembling the stiff children captured in post-mortem photography, their lifeless bodies dressed to appear as though sleep had only just claimed them. She was alive, but only barely. Each secret drained her further, as though she was being consumed by the very truth she carried. The village had become a haunted place. Doors were locked before dusk. Prayers echoed through the chapel at midnight. The tavern was filled with whisper, no longer of politics or crops, but of Catherine Doyle, the child who knew too much. People feared the sound of her voice, yet they could not resist gathering to hear it again. Dark history remembers this period, not only for famine and loss, but for the way superstition and guilt poisoned communities. Catherine was now its perfect mirror, reflecting every chilling secret, every buried sin, every shadow that had been ignored. Imagine being there. The cottage lit only by a single candle. A group of villagers huddled close, their faces tense. Catherine clutching a small locket brought by a grieving mother. Then, in a hollow whisper, the child speaks. He did not die in the river. He was placed there. By your brother's hand. The room would fall silent. The grieving mother's face pale, her body trembling. And outside, the wind howling against the walls as though carrying the voices of the dead. The Doyle family no longer lived in peace. Their home was a place of torment, surrounded by suspicion and desperation. Catherine was exhausted, her body frail, her eyes shadowed. Yet her whispers only grew sharper, more dangerous. Each secret she spoke pushed the village closer to collapse. But what came next would shatter the fragile balance entirely. Catherine would reveal something not merely hidden, not merely shameful, but something that would bring death to the village before the year was over. The year was still 1871. Autumn had cast its long shadows, and the whispers of Catherine Doyle had already torn the village apart. Families turned against one another, secrets bled into daylight, and the old bonds of kinship dissolved into fear. There was only one place left where the people believed safety could be found, the church. But even the church was no longer safe. The parish priest, Father Brennan, had watched the growing hysteria with deepening unease. He had seen how the Doyle child's words carried weight heavier than scripture, how the villagers now turned to her with trembling devotion. They came to Catherine for truth instead of the confessional. To Father Brennan, it was blasphemy. To the fearful villagers, it was survival. It was decided she must be brought before the church, questioned in the house of God itself. Perhaps there, beneath the crucifix, her whispers would falter. Perhaps the shadows would retreat. They brought Catherine to the chapel on a cold evening, the air heavy with the smell of candle wax and damp stone. The pews were filled, every villager leaning forward, faces drawn in the flickering light. Some prayed beneath their breath. Others watched with the hunger of those who crave spectacle. Catherine was only a child, but in that moment she looked like something far older. Her eyes were dark hollows. Her skin, pale as wax. The priest questioned her. He asked simple things first, her name, her age, her prayers. Her answers were soft, unremarkable. But when he pressed harder, asking where her knowledge came from, the atmosphere shifted. Witnesses said her voice deepened. She began to speak in that forbidden language once more, words curling and breaking in ways no one understood. The sound filled the chapel, echoing against the stone walls, a dreadful mockery of holy chant. Some claimed the candles flickered wildly, though there was no wind. Others swore that a shape moved in the rafters, a black outline that lingered where no light should fall. The villagers clutched their rosaries tighter. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Catherine's whispers grew stronger. She spoke of the sinister past hidden even within the church itself. She accused a former priest, long dead, of sins against children buried decades earlier. She named names of villagers who had bribed the clergy, who had lied in confession, who had broken vows in secret. Every word a blade. Every detail an unhealed wound. Look closely at the old photos taken around this time. Solemn groups outside the chapel, their faces stiff, their eyes downcast. At first, they seem like ordinary village portraits. But if you linger, the unease grows. Some of the children look frozen, their expressions eerily similar to those in post-mortem photography, silent, hollow, as though the photographer captured not the living, but those already claimed by shadows. The chapel, once sanctuary, became a theater of dread. Villagers who had come seeking comfort instead found themselves stripped bare. Each revelation drove them further into panic. Catherine's words were no longer just creepy storytelling. They were a reckoning. The priest, pale and trembling, declared her words the work of the devil. He raised the crucifix high, commanding silence. Catherine's small body shook violently, her lips moving still, though no sound emerged. Then, With a voice not her own, she uttered a final sentence. "The dead are already here. They are watching you." The chapel erupted. Some fled, screaming into the night. Others fell to their knees, sobbing. Father Brennan himself dropped the crucifix, his face as white as the stone altar. From that night onward, the church was no longer seen as protection. It was seen as a place haunted by shadows, a place where the dead themselves gathered to listen. And Catherine Doyle, the fragile child who should have been silent, had become the mouthpiece for truths that no one wanted spoken. But she was not finished. The secrets she had revealed in the chapel would only pave the way for what came next, her most dangerous revelation of all. The year was 1871, and winter had begun its slow descent upon the village. The air was brittle, the nights long, and fear hung heavier than the frost. For weeks, Catherine Doyle's whispers had torn the community apart. Families broken, friendships dissolved, the chapel desecrated by secrets no priest could silence. But the dead were not finished speaking through her. There came one night. A night the villagers would never forget. The night of the final revelation. It began with a gathering. The Doyle cottage, already a place of dread, was crowded beyond its walls. Candles lit the single room in a trembling glow, their flames bending as though recoiling from what was to come. Villagers huddled together, clutching rosaries, clutching one another, waiting for the child to speak. Some came out of terror, others out of hunger for truth. All came because they knew Catherine's whispers had never been wrong. The girl sat pale and still in her chair, her hands folded around a small wooden rosary. She looked less like a child and more like one of those disturbing images captured in post-mortem photography, eyes wide, lips parted, frozen between life and death. When her breathing slowed, the room fell into silence. And then she spoke. The words poured out in a voice not her own. Low, hollow, each syllable heavy as stone. She spoke of graves that had not yet been uncovered, of children vanished without a trace, their tiny bones hidden beneath hearthstones, buried in cellars, sealed within the walls of cottages. She named names again, names of men and women who sat in the room that very night. Accusations rang out like thunder. "You," she said, pointing at a woman near the doorway, "hid the child who bore no father's name." The woman collapsed to the floor, weeping. "You," she whispered to an old man, watched him drown, and said nothing. His face went as pale as chalk. Each revelation cut deeper than the last. But then Catherine's voice shifted once more. The forbidden language returned, thick, guttural, impossible to place. The villagers recoiled. Some swore that the air grew colder, their breath visible in the candlelight. Others claimed shadows moved along the walls, stretching like skeletal hands. Look closely at the forgotten events of this night as they were later described. Every eerie detail feels like a horror story. Yet the accounts remain chillingly consistent. Witnesses claimed Catherine's voice multiplied, as though many mouths were speaking through one child. They heard cries of the drowned, whispers of the buried, screams of the betrayed. The dead themselves were present. And then came the final revelation. Catherine's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Her body stiffened, her voice shrieked. "The village is cursed. Its blood is rotten. Before the year ends, death will claim more of you. None will be spared the judgment of the dead." Panic erupted. Some villagers rushed for the door, only to find it stuck as though sealed by unseen hands. Mothers clutched their children, fathers shouted prayers, others begged Catherine to stop. But her voice only grew louder. "The dead are watching. The dead are listening, and the dead will take what is theirs." Finally, the child collapsed. Silent, motionless. For a long, terrible moment, it seemed she had joined the dead herself. When her breathing returned, shallow and weak, the villagers fled into the night. They spoke of shadows chasing them through the fields, of whispers following in the wind. The Doyle family, broken and terrified, lifted Catherine into bed. She never spoke again with the same terrible clarity. Her final revelation had drained her, body and soul, but the curse lingered. In the weeks that followed, Strange deaths swept through the village. A man found drowned in the river, though he had not gone near water. A child vanished, never seen again. A woman wasted away, her body reduced to bone within days. Each death was whispered to be the fulfillment of Catherine's prophecy. The villagers no longer doubted. They no longer whispered. They fled. One by one, families abandoned their homes, leaving behind only empty cottages, rotting timbers, and shadows on the walls. The place became a ghost village. A haunted place, lost in time. And Catherine Doyle, child, oracle, curse, was left with a voice that no one dared listen to again. But her final revelation was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning of her disappearance. The year was 1871, and the Doyle family's cottage had become a hollow shell. After the night of the final revelation, Catherine no longer spoke in strange tongues, no longer named names, no longer described the sins of the dead. Her lips were sealed, her eyes empty. Silence had replaced the whispers that once terrified the village. But silence carries its own weight. For weeks, Catherine lay pale and frail, her body shrinking into the bed as though life itself was abandoning her. Villagers who once begged for her words now feared even to look upon her. They crossed themselves when passing the Doyle home, muttered prayers, and pulled their children close. To them, Catherine had become more ghost than child, a living curse. The Doyle family tried to protect her. They shut their doors, shuttered their windows, and refused the desperate who still knocked at night. But the whispers outside never stopped. She will bring more death. The devil lives in her. The child must be given back to the grave. Old photos from this time, faded, cracked, barely surviving, show the Doyle cottage in the background. The faces of neighbors are grim, their children stiff and silent. At first glance, these images seem like ordinary village portraits. Yet, if you stare long enough, a wrongness bleeds through. The eyes too hollow, the expressions too flat. They resemble the frozen stillness of post-mortem photography. A village caught between the living and the dead. And then, one night, Catherine was gone. Her mother swore she had checked on her before dawn, her frail body still breathing, still clutching the wooden rosary. But when morning came, the bed was empty. No sign of struggle. No footprints in the frost outside. No broken door. It was as if she had been lifted from her bed and carried into nothingness. The villagers searched the fields, the bogs, the riverbanks. Men with lanterns combed the woods. Women prayed at the chapel, begging for her return. But Catherine Doyle had vanished. Some whispered she had been taken by the dead themselves, claimed by the very soul she had spoken for. Others said the devil had come for his prize, collecting the child he had marked with a forbidden language and chilling secrets. A few believed her family, broken and desperate, had hidden her away to end the torment. No body was ever found. No grave was ever dug. Catherine Doyle simply dissolved into the dark fabric of the village's unsettling history. In the years that followed, the Doyle cottage was abandoned. The village itself thinned out, families fleeing until only ruins remained. To this day, the site is avoided. Travelers speak of a heavy silence that clings to the air, of shadows that move where no trees stand, of children's voices whispering in the wind. Catherine's name lingers only in fragments, old church records, faded notes, the scattered memories of a cursed year. But her mysterious disappearance remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of Ireland's forgotten past. And yet, the silence left behind is more terrifying than her words ever were. For silence is not the end. Silence is the waiting place between one haunting and the next. And in that silence, some swear Catherine Doyle is still speaking, just not in a voice the living can hear. The year was 1871, and with Catherine Doyle's disappearance, silence fell upon the village. But it was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of empty homes, abandoned fields, and rotting cottages where laughter had once lived. The silence of fear left behind, of secrets that could never again be buried. The Doyle family, shattered, left the village soon after. Their names faded from parish records, their faces lost in time. No one knows where they went, or whether Catherine's memory followed them like a shadow. What remained was not her presence, but her absence, an echo that no one dared to speak of again. Look closely at the fragments of history that survive: scattered parish notes, faded old photos, half-remembered stories whispered in pubs decades later. The images seem ordinary: children lined up stiffly, families gathered outside crumbling cottages. But behind every still face is the weight of fear, a reminder that Catherine's voice once cut through them all. These photographs do not smile. They only stare back, hollow and haunting, as if they too know the hidden truth. Catherine Doyle had become more than a child. She had become a mirror, reflecting the village's sinister past, its buried crimes, its chilling secrets, its whispers of guilt. Her story is not merely folklore. It is a warning about the shadows that lurk when history is left to rot in silence. And so her tale drifts into the realm of dark history, where fact and legend entwine. Some say she was taken by the dead, claimed as their mouthpiece forever. Others insist her family fled and silenced her, fearing what her voice might still reveal. But the truth is this: Catherine Doyle remains one of Ireland's great unsolved mysteries. A child lost in time. A voice that knew too much. Even now, travelers who wander near the ruins of her village speak of strange things. Of haunted places where the air grows heavy, where children's laughter echoes faintly though no children remain. Some claim they have heard a girl's whisper in the wind, soft and urgent. Secrets spoken too quietly to be understood, but heavy enough to chill the blood. Perhaps she is still speaking. Perhaps the silence was never real. Perhaps the dead still cling to her voice. This is the curse of Catherine Doyle, the child who knew too much. A story not forgotten, but buried in shadows. A story that reminds us that some truths are not meant to be spoken. And now, as you turn away from this tale, ask yourself, what secrets lie hidden in your own past, waiting for a voice to speak them aloud? Because sometimes, silence is not safety. Sometimes silence is only the beginning. Thank you for wandering with us through this story of forgotten dread. If you felt the shadows stir tonight, remember, you are not alone. The dead are always listening.